Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. This is Campus Wire, and uh, I posted an announcement on Campus Wire, and I want you guys to use Campus Wire. I think it's a good place for discussion and stuff. But anyway, one of the things I put up was a link to kind of this Google Doc or Google Sheets where you can put in your contact information and help identify or find some groups. So some of you guys have already put in your group information, and I hope that's all good, and I hope the rest of you can reach out and find groups to work with. And then over here on Campus Wire, there's an area called Rooms, and you can kind of create a room. I think you guys can create your own rooms, okay? And you can kind of establish, the name of your room, and then you can add people to be part of that room, okay? So. And then you can kind of chat with each other there, and use that as kind of a little bit of a hub for communication. Okay. Any questions or issues or anything like that? And does everyone here have a group? You don't have a group. Okay. All right. Maybe at the end of class, I'll have everybody who doesn't have a group kind of hang out and try to find a group or something, okay? Just remind me to do that. All right, so today's topic is we're going to take a look at chapter 8. And now we're starting to shift a little bit, okay? The focus of our course is now going to start to shift a little bit into the doing and thinking about data science and data analysis. So kind of the first few weeks felt like it was very heavy on using R, and it was. It was a lot about just kind of introducing these tools, how to use these tools, and the hope is that now that you have some familiarity with the tools, and I don't expect any of you to be experts yet, but at least you have some familiarity with the tools. At least you can make some graphics, you can make some summaries, and manipulate data, and create new columns and variables and things like that. Now that you've got some of the basic tools, we can start thinking about or talking about how do we think about data analysis? How do we pose questions and go about answering those types of things, okay? And before we really get into the how, we should discuss maybe a little bit of the why, and part of that is this discussion on ethics, okay? Ethics being kind of, how do we conduct ourselves so that what we do doesn't harm other people, right? We want to kind of make sure that we are not, harming others. Oh, I forgot. Okay, reminders, daily symptom monitoring. Actually, I think I got to do that myself. And then, and I have some data camp stuff on, I think on loops and ifs and conditions and stuff like that. That's due on Friday. Okay, and then you can expect homework 3 to kind of make its appearance eventually. Okay, but I mean, there's no homework 3 is not due this Friday, right? Giving you a week off in terms of homework stuff, but next week there will be stuff. Okay, so don't worry, you'll get homework, but just not this week. Okay. All right, so the reading's based off of chapter 8, and I'm really I'm taking a lot of things almost directly from the textbook here, but we can expand on some of these ideas. Okay, so I don't know if anybody here is considering medical school or pursuing medicine or something. But doctors, they have to take a Hippocratic Oath, right? Which is basically do no harm. That their actions as a doctor is not going to harm the patient, and this means that certain things they're not allowed to do certain things, right? Like certainly there are experiments that could be that perhaps we could gain knowledge and insight from, but conducting such an experiment, would be detrimental to its participants, right? So for example, what if we wanted to see, what are the long-term effects of marijuana usage? Okay, what are the effects of marijuana usage on perhaps an adolescent or maybe long-term usage on an adult? And right now the only kinds of studies we can do are what we call observational studies, and we'll talk about a little bit of these differences between observational studies and controlled experiments. But basically, the only thing we can do is we can survey people and say, do you use marijuana? And we can try to do some kind of tests to see, we could do health tests and do exams and maybe give them different tests for kind of their cognition and things, and we can try to do some kind of study. But there's a heavy, but the people who use marijuana are self-selected, right? These people chose on their own volition to use marijuana, and we cannot run an experiment where we are going to force people to use marijuana to see what effect it has on them, right? Because in a controlled experiment, you want a control group and a treatment group, and we'll talk a little bit more about how controlled experiments go. But generally, you set it up. The people don't get to choose whether they get the placebo or the actual drug, and then you see if there's a difference. Okay. Same thing with kind of smoking. We're not allowed to force people to start smoking to see, what effect does it have on lung disease and things like that. And there's a lot of things like this where, because of ethical reasons, we cannot do certain experiments. If as a society we valued only efficiency, if we valued only kind of the quote unquote greater good, and we didn't care about individual human rights, then ethics wouldn't play as much of a role. We would just say, oh, this is for the good of science, and we are willing to sacrifice, human lives in the process. But that's certainly problematic, right? And I feel like in movies where there's a supervillain, the supervillain is often driven by some kind of strange or twisted thing where they're saying, this is the to save the universe we have to kill half the people, right? Or I don't know. There's all sorts of weird things. But anyway, going back to the Hippocratic Oath, here are a few principles from the Hippocratic Oath. You can look up the Hippocratic Oath on Wikipedia, and it's got kind of like the full things. But there's a few principles that our textbook has taken and has adapted for data science. So as far as medicine goes, these three principles to say, I will not be ashamed to say, I know not, or I don't know, right? And if we don't know something, we ask people for help, okay? We ask other people for help, other people who are experts. And certainly, as you guys are starting out, there's going to be a lot of things you don't know, and there's no shame in asking or admitting things and saying, I don't know how to do this, right? If you're an intern and your boss asks you to do something and you don't know how to do it, it's better to say, you know what, I don't know how to do this, okay? And you just say, you know what, I'm gonna have to learn how to do this, right? Maybe you can ask, do you know somebody who can teach me? Or maybe you'll say, is it okay if I take some time to learn this, and things like that, right? Don't pretend that you know what you're doing if you don't know what you're doing, okay? That's more dangerous, okay? Well, I guess we'll talk about that. All right, so, I guess we'll stick to the Hippocratic Oath as far as patients in medicine goes. It says, I will respect the privacy of my patients, for their problems are not disclosed to me, so that the world may know. Okay, and I will remember that I remain a member of society with special obligations to all of my fellow human beings, those sound of mind and body, as well as the infirm, okay, as well as those who are sick, not just the healthy. Okay, so here are some examples of perhaps ethical violations here, right? So there's a few different categories where ethical violations can exist as it pertains to data, and one is producing misleading graphics, okay? And so this is a graphic that came out after the shooting or the killing of Trayvon Martin, who was an unarmed black teenager in Florida, and a man, George Zimmerman, killed him under the kind of justified his actions using the Florida Stand Your Ground law, okay? And so during that news period where that story was in the news, this graphic was published, okay? And it says gun deaths in Florida. And it says this is, in 2005, Florida enacted its Stand Your Ground law. And what does it look like, okay? It looks like immediately after 2005, there's a sharp change and it goes down, okay? However, if you look carefully at the graphic, how are the numbers measured? They put the 0 at the top and the numbers get bigger as you go down, okay? Which is different from most convention, right? Most convention we see 0 at, like, small numbers at the bottom, and they go up, right? And so the visual cue of things going down actually is reversed here. After 2005, there's actually a very sharp increase, okay? And, we can't necessarily say that this is a cause and effect thing, and that this one change has brought about this effect, but certainly, I'm not sure what the authors of this graphic, what their intent was, and I don't know if their intent was malicious or not, but certainly this can convey perhaps something it's confusing to look at, right? And we have to think about what is the implications of some kind of graphic like this. So the y-axis has been flipped down, whereas the convention is that going up corresponds to increasing values. Here's another graphic that was used, okay? So this tweet has, a lot of people noticed problems with this, and they complained, and so the author of this tweet has since deleted it, okay? But it's titled, or it's given kind of the caption, "The Only Climate Change Chart That You Need to See," and the title says, "Average Annual Global Temperature in Fahrenheit from 1880 to 2015." And what does it look like? It looks like it's pretty flat, okay? And we're looking at annual average, okay? And the vertical axis goes from negative 10 degrees Fahrenheit, or 0 degrees Fahrenheit, to 110 degrees Fahrenheit, okay? And so what's the issue there? The issue there is that this scale is not appropriate for this graphic, okay? If we were talking about daily temperatures, kind of globally or something, certainly there's going to be some parts of the world where it's 0 degrees Fahrenheit and other parts of the world where it might reach 110 degrees Fahrenheit. But here it says average annual global temperature, right? So we're just averaging the global temperature for the entire year, okay? When you average the global temperature for the entire year, a small change is a significant thing, okay? And there's kind of, you know, the ideas of like, how much will the icebergs melt? You know, how much ice will melt if there's even, say, a 5-degree change in the annual average global temperature. That's going to be fairly significant, okay? Where they talk about kind of a target of 2 degrees Celsius, because beyond that, it could be damaging, and so there does seem to be a change of about 5 degrees from around 55 to around 60 degrees here. But again, that change is very based on the scaling here. It's meant to be. It looks quite small, but what is the appropriate scale? Probably not this. Probably not going from 0 to 110. Okay. So here's another. This one's very recent. Okay. So this came out in around May of 2020. Okay. This came out of Georgia, and it was titled "The Top 5 Counties in Georgia with the Greatest Number of Confirmed COVID-19 Cases." So this was kind of early on, May 2020. So if you think back to just a year and a half ago or so. All right, and so it says the chart represents the most impacted counties over the past 15 days and the number of cases over time. The table below also represents, so they have, I guess they also came with a table. All right, and so when you look at this, what does it look like is happening? Decreasing. It looks like it's decreasing over time, okay? But look carefully at the x-axis. What do we have? It says April 19th is over here, April 17th is here, April 22nd is here, April 20th is next, April 21st, April 28th, April 24th, April 23rd, April 27th, April 18, April 29, April 25. It's not in chronological order on the x-axis, okay? Which is, if somebody says you're making up data, they can say, no, we're not making up data. The data is technically accurate, okay? They're not necessarily fabricating data. But what they're doing is, and again, was this intentional, or is this just some happy accident? We as people who look at charts, we expect, if there's time on the x-axis, we expect it to be in chronological order, where older events happened before and newer events are more recent, happen on the right. Okay, and this graphic seems to be arranged so that kind of average of decreasing, so it looks like the largest numbers are on the left and the smallest numbers are on the right, whereas they're not necessarily in chronological order. Right, in chronological order, we might see a trend that could be a little bit more worrying, that the cases are increasing, or the cases are fluctuating, or the cases remain steady, or something like that. Certainly there's kind of day-to-day variations, but the fact that this was not put in chronological order is an issue in my opinion here. Okay, so these are just kind of examples of misleading graphics that I think it's our responsibility to produce graphics that are informative, and ones that people don't have to inspect with a magnifying glass to say, hey, this doesn't fit the normal conventions, right? Okay, let me give you your first view quiz answer for today. Today's first view quiz answer is the letter C. C as in cat. C as in cat. Okay? All right, so the textbook gives us a bunch of these examples where, we ask, how should ethics play a role, right? So perhaps it's actually easier if I just read some of these descriptions from the from the textbook. Okay, so this one, it says sorry, let me let's make it a little bit bigger. Okay. All right, so one of the authors says they worked as a statistical consultant for a client who wanted a proprietary model to predict commercial outcomes. So basically, they're just trying to predict sales and things like that. And they found, after reviewing the literature, they found a regression model that already existed. Okay, and it fit the data. Public data was available, and they were able to use that. When showed it to the client, most of them were happy, but the CEO wanted, a model that would benefit his company more than his competitors, right? And it says, after all, the competitors could easily follow the same process to the same model. So what advantage would the client's company have? So the CEO asked the consultant whether the coefficients in the model could be tweaked to reflect the specific values of his company. The consultant suggested that this would not be appropriate, that the fitted coefficients are the best match that the data, and to change them arbitrarily would be playing God. And in response, the CEO rose from his chair and asserted, I want to play God. Okay. How should the consultant respond here? Okay. So we'll just kind of read through all of these, and we can talk about, certainly we have different, we can open this up for discussion. So I'll just kind of go through all of these different scenarios here. And some of these things we'll be like, that doesn't seem like a problem, or maybe this is a problem. Okay, here's another one. Okay, it says one of us works on legal cases arising from audits of employers conducted by the U.S. Office of Federal Contract Compliance Programs. Okay, so there's this office, and it says in a typical case, this office asks for hiring and salary data from a company that has a contract with the U.S. government, right? And the U.S. government just says, they hire out all of these different companies that do kind of outsourcing work. And it says the company usually complies, sometimes unaware that this office then applies a method to identify discrimination, okay? And it puts discrimination in quotes, through a 2 standard deviation test outlined in the Uniform Guidelines of Employee Selection Procedures. Okay, so apparently there's some kind of guideline that says when you hire employees, this is kind of what should happen, okay? And maybe some companies are aware of this, maybe they're not aware of this, okay? But apparently the method that is being used, okay, will sometimes identify false positives, right? And it says sometimes a company that does not discriminate still has some risk of being identified or labeled as being discriminatory. Okay, and the authors ask, by using a questionable statistical method, is this office acting unethically? Right. So the authors are asking, sometimes people are just using statistics in a poor way that could end up having, negative consequences. What do we do in situations like that? Here's another scenario, okay? It says, so these authors, Wang and Kosinski, they said they used a deep neural network. So neural network is kind of just this statistical kind of procedure where you feed in data and it does stuff and it spits out an answer, okay? It sounds really fancy, okay? But basically, it's like a function. You put in some parameters, you put in some information, and it spits out an answer, okay? Just think of it as that, right? A function, you put in an x value, and it spits out, y, and basically a neural network works kind of in a similar way. All right, so they used a neural network and a logistic regression to build a classifier. So all to say, what they did is the input is a photograph of a person's face, and then the output of this thing is a prediction for sexual orientation. So they say we put in this face, and our magic machine predicts this person might be straight, this person might be gay, something like that. Okay. And the authors claim that if given 5 images of a person's face, right, so you get 5 people's faces, the model would correctly predict sexual orientation of 91% of men and 83% of women. And the authors also highlight potential harm that their work could do. It says, additionally, given that companies and governments are increasingly using computer vision algorithms to detect people's intimate traits, our findings expose a threat to the privacy and safety of gay men and women. Okay, and then another article was published in the New Yorker that stated the study consisted entirely of white faces because only the dating site had served up too few faces of color to provide the meaningful analysis. So basically, their source of data as far as trying to get their neural network and their prediction system to work, they use data from, I guess, a dating website. And as far as the dating website goes, the clients were mostly white men and women. And so the question is, first of all, was it unethical even to just create this project in the first place? Okay, and then secondly, is there something unethical about just the way the research was done? Okay, notwithstanding, just is this even valid or not? Okay, because the authors would probably try to justify their actions and things like that. Okay, similarly, so this one is trying to. So there's kind of a lot of questions like, so this one is trying to identify sexual orientation based on a picture. This one is something similar but a little bit different. People have built a statistical model, and this package, the results of this is actually available as a package that you could download on your own computer, and this will try to predict a person's race based on their last name, right? So, for example, before you even saw my face, when you saw my name listed as the professor of this class, you could probably have guessed that I was going to be an Asian person, right? Because my last name is Chen, and that's fairly common among, probably most people with the last name Chen are of Asian descent, and I'm certainly the case. And basically, some researchers did something similar. They were looking at last names and also addresses and things like that. And they came up with this thing that said, basically, given a certain last name, what is the race that we would predict? And they predicted some percentage white, black, Hispanic, or Asian, or other, or something. And this is kind of their thing. All right. Is there any issue with having something like this? Is this okay? Is this questionable? Could it be used for abuse? Right? And it says, given the long history of systemic racism in the United States, it is clear how this software could be used to discriminate against people of color. And it said, one of us, as far as the authors, one of the authors actually partnered with a kind of a progressive voting rights organization that wanted to use racial prediction to target members of an ethnic group to actually help them to register to vote. So somebody could say, oh, well, with this information, we can actually do good, right? If we know certain racial groups don't vote as often, we can try to find them, and then help them to vote and things like that. And there's questions there, okay? So another, this is an issue that you could even encounter in the first place, or just even on your own, as you guys are looking for data sources to use, right? So you guys are going on different websites, Kaggle, these government websites, these other places that have things. Some of you might say, hey, you know what? Maybe we should scrape our own data, okay? That's a possibility, right? And so a paper was published where data came from OkCupid, okay? OkCupid, a very large public data set of dating site users. So that's OkCupid is kind of, a dating website, and the data set that they scraped came from 68,371 people, like real people, and they gathered a whole bunch of different variables, and they gathered all of this in some kind of data dump, and they were asking different kinds of questions related to different things, and one of them was like zodiac users, zodiac signs. Did that help with anything? And you know, the result of their study was that it didn't help. But the question is, it was the fact that they even just scraped this data. Is that okay? All right. So it's not like they didn't do anything illegal. It's not like they hacked the website, right? This is kind of stuff that's, you know, people had put their profile information up on OkCupid, right? But then they kind of went out and they gathered all of this and kind of compiled it. And some people said, hey, you know what, this is kind of like doxing. It's the kind of the term of like revealing, you know, a lot of people's personal information without necessarily asking them for permission and things like that. Is that a problem? Okay. All right. Okay. Well, we're gonna run out of time if I keep reading through all of these things, but there's a few more examples here. Okay. What do you guys think? Let's go back to this. This is something that you might encounter. Okay. You might not necessarily work exactly with the CEO, but you might work with you might have an internship. You might end up working for a company, and your managers perhaps want to see a certain result, right? And the question is, you know, what is your responsibility as an employee who is kind of at some degree beholden to the company and its desires, or your manager and their desires, but also you know, they're asking you to design something that, you know, you feel like, oh, maybe it doesn't quite fit the data, right? So what do you guys think? Yeah.
I think the CEO should learn how to build dashboards.
Okay.
And also, like, just like the having a worse model. Like, it would just end up biting him in the ass. Like, maybe he wants to show better rates.
Okay.
He just wouldn't hit that number.
All right. So the suggestion here is to try to teach the CEO that that this model that we have here is actually the best, and trying to artificially control some of the things ourselves is counterproductive. Okay, something like that. Any other thoughts on something like this, or
He counters the point that if you haven't tried how you know.
what's that?
Like, what if he counters the point by saying, if you haven't tried how you know?
If we haven't
Tried how you know. The point. So basically, the CEO's point is simply to maximize our strengths. That's it. And so if tweaking the number in some way helps bringing our numbers up and lowering the numbers down, it will actually be helpful.
So the question, I guess, you know, maybe it's okay to tweak the numbers to fit the CEO's desires, even if it produces maybe, at least according to linear regression, maybe the numbers won't be as accurate as far as making a prediction, but perhaps it could be done anyway to kind of fit what the I guess the CEO wants. Okay.
It's not like the most ethical thing to do.
What's that?
It's not like the most ethical thing to do.
Most ethical? Well, I mean, what when we talk about ethics, what do we mean, right?
Like it's not affect other people, but other companies that's part of it.
So, I mean, at some point, right? When you talk about the things we do, right? If you think about working for a company, you're trying to help your company to succeed, and maybe your company's success means another company's failure, okay? And so if you kind of say, well, I don't want my work to harm other people, so I don't want my company to succeed because that means the other company will fail, you know, we would be paralyzed in this situation where like we can't take any action that would help anyone, because helping someone could end up harming someone else, right? So you know, that could, some of these things could be taken to the extreme. The textbook provides a few guidelines that we could then apply to different situations and scenarios that perhaps could help us. And again, here's the thing with ethics is not everything has a clear-cut answer, right? Not everything has a clear-cut answer. And we could have a discussion and talk about what is the right thing, or what would you yourself feel comfortable doing, and not necessarily everyone will agree, right? But I think it's important to kind of identify what are the values that you have for yourself, and that you try to live according to those values, and not just be subject to what other people kind of put upon you, right? You have your own kind of core values, have your own kind of boundaries as far as things that you are willing to do, and things where you draw the line and say, I'm not willing to do this thing, right? Okay, so adapting the Hippocratic Oath for doctors to the realm of data science, okay, number one, we can still say, not be ashamed to say I don't know, and we'll call on our colleagues when the skills of another are needed for solving a problem. That applies, okay? And we'll say, you know, we should respect the privacy and the privacy of the data of our data subjects, right? So for example, if we do gather data from people, we should respect the privacy of their data. And this is kind of becoming, I think, a hotter topic in the news, and I think people are starting to realize how much of our personal information is now out there, right? And I'm not sure, like, who here has a Facebook account? Or who does not have a Facebook? Maybe that's a more relevant question. Okay, who has like deleted their Facebook account or does not have a Facebook account? So I think I saw maybe three hands or something. Okay, and there's kind of, so in years past, yeah, I would ask who has Facebook, and it would almost always be 100%, and now it's not quite at 100%. A lot of people still have Facebook, but I think some people are starting to delete their Facebook. Did you delete yours, or did you ever never have one to begin with? Yeah. You what?
It's like my parents use, it's also how to use.
Okay.
So I never made one.
You never made one. Okay.
But I have Instagram, so maybe that's not Facebook.
All right. So okay. So you still Facebook does still have some touch here, right? And so I think some people are starting this idea of try to reclaim your data is starting to pick up a tiny bit of steam. But then also, yeah, companies always want your data, and they're always trying to entice you by saying, hey, sign up for this, and you know you'll get coupons and things like that. I've downloaded the apps for like every single fast food company because I eat quite a bit of fast food, and and when you sign up for their app, you get coupons. But you know, I'm fully aware that I'm trading away a bit of my privacy and my data in exchange for these coupons and things like that, right? But anyway, so when somebody entrusts you with their data, we should respect that, respect their privacy. And certain companies, you know, you have like DuckDuckGo and Mozilla that are trying to design web-based products that value privacy, okay? And then the important thing also, number 3, is we'll remember that my data are not just numbers without meaning or context, but actually represent real people, real situations, and that the work you do could lead, and this is kind of an issue, it could lead to unintended societal consequences, such as inequality, poverty, and disparities due to algorithmic bias. And I'll probably, we can further discuss this on Friday, because I think there's a lot of things that we didn't even realize. And this topic of algorithmic bias, I don't know if you guys have heard of it, but it's a real thing. It's a real thing that we have to be aware of. Okay, and perhaps if you're ever in a situation where you are able to design algorithms or be part of that design process, you can speak up for others. Okay, let me give you your second view quiz answer. The second view quiz answer is E. E as in elephant. E as in elephant. Okay, and so here is another set of principles. It says data values and principles published. There's a manifesto. Anytime you use the word manifesto, it sounds a little bit dramatic here. But we have the Data Values and Principles Manifesto published by Data Practices. And these are kind of 12 principles that they say that one should hold while working in data science. And perhaps not everybody will agree with all 12 of these data points. Some will say, you know what, I don't think this point is important for me, and again, as far as ethics go, it's difficult to say this is the answer and it applies to everybody, right? This is not quite how it works, right? And so individually we need to make choices and decisions about what is or is not ethical, and we can have debates and conversations about this, but it's good to talk about, right? Okay, so number one, it says use data to improve life for our users, customers, organizations, and communities, right? So basically, don't use data to harm people. Don't use data to try to right? We want to improve people's lives and not necessarily harm them. Okay, number two, create reproducible and extensible work. So when we publish our findings, we want other people to kind of understand where this came from in a reproducible way, meaning that the results of your algorithm or the results of your finding, other people should be able to look at the data and say, oh yeah, I'm able to arrive at the same conclusions you did, rather than you just say, hey, these are the answers and you have to trust me, right? Okay, number three, build teams with diverse ideas, backgrounds, and strengths, okay? If you work only with people that think like you, then your solution will only be something that that only you are kind of I guess might not consider other viewpoints and other values and things from other other parts of the world, and sometimes that means working with people that you disagree with, right? So and I know in this kind of political climate, it's very easy to kind of vilify people that have different political opinions than you regarding whatever it is. And depending on the scenario, it could be quite to your detriment to not even consider some of the thoughts of other people. And certainly, where people draw the line between I'm willing to hear what you have to say versus what you have to say is so disagreeable to me that I'm not willing to hear, that's going to differ to some people. And it's good to have boundaries to say, I draw the line here, and your ideas are so far beyond this, I'm not willing to entertain them. And that's fine, but that line we have to recognize might be different for everybody as well, okay? Number four, prioritize the continuous collection and availability of discussions and metadata, meaning you don't want to just take your stuff from years ago and base things on the future based on that, kind of continue to update and things like that. Number five, clearly identify the questions and objectives that drive each project and use to guide both planning and refinement. So think about what's the purpose in the first place. Okay. Number 6, be open to changing our methods and conclusions in response to new knowledge. Number 7, recognize and mitigate bias in ourselves and in the data we use. And this is something that we might not even be aware of. Okay. Number 8, present our work in ways that empower others to make better informed decisions. Number 9, carefully consider the ethical implications of choices we make when using data and the impacts of our work on individuals and society. 10, respect and invite fair criticism while promoting the identification and open discussion of errors, risks, and unintended consequences of our work. 11, protect the privacy and security of individuals represented in our data. And 12, help others to understand the most useful and appropriate applications of data and solve real-world problems. Okay? And the textbook goes through each of the scenarios that it listed earlier and says these are some of the kind of guidelines that we might want to consider, right? So going back to this thing with the CEO talking about modifying our coefficients from the values generated by linear regression, is this the right thing to do? Okay, so it says, the stakeholder in this setting is the company, and it says if your work will involve a method that's not accepted by a professional community, you're obliged to point this out to the company, right? So linear regression, that's a tried and true method, and people will say, okay, that makes sense. Taking linear regression and just saying like, hey, I'm going to just change the numbers, probably not an accepted method. And it says, okay, so consider principles 8 and 12. 8 being present our work in ways that empower others to make better informed decisions. So maybe the CEO just is not fully aware, and so we can talk about teaching the CEO what this is. All right, along with help others to understand the most useful and appropriate applications. So that's what we have, right? And so we can ask, have we presented our work in a way that help people to make good decisions? Okay, and certainly, you're also respect the fact that your client, okay, the CEO, has substantial knowledge of how their business works, okay? In that the CEO could also be aware of certain factors that just aren't reflected in the data, right? The CEO or people, experts in the company, especially if you're hired by a consultant, could say, you know what, this might be what your statistical method has produced, but I know for a fact that this can't be the case because of something, right? For example, I don't know, we could do some kind of analysis, and perhaps the analysis comes back, one of the coefficients ends up being negative, and it says, that doesn't make sense. The negative coefficient would imply that increasing this is going to, reduce the cost, but it's something. Everything else tells us that it's got to increase the cost. So maybe we're missing something in the data. Maybe there's another variable that's, there's collinearity. There's different things, right? And so there has to be a certain humility as well regarding our own selves and our own statistical knowledge to say that this is the answer and this is the only answer. Okay, so this type of situation might involve just having to work closely with the CEO or the client to identify what the real problem is and what can be done. Okay. It's already 9:50. Okay, so I guess we'll have to just further save our discussion for Friday, and on Friday we'll take a look at algorithmic bias, which perhaps in our class we're not going to really get into designing a whole bunch of these algorithms, but the problem of algorithmic bias does crop up, and it's something that I think is relevant and something we need to be aware of here. Okay, let me go ahead and give you your last view quiz answer for today. Last view quiz answer is the letter D. D as in dog. D as in dog. Okay, we'll stop here for today, and we'll see you guys on Friday.